A 25-year-old young woman, beautiful, sweet, a virgin. That's how Emily Grace Thompson was known, the bride all of Manhattan was talking about. Raised with traditional values by her widowed mother, Emily believed in love in a way few people still did. She cherished her purity as a gift, not just for someone else, but as a reflection of herself. She believed that one day, the right man would earn not just her body, but her whole heart. And that man, she thought, was Ethan Wallace. The charming attorney, son of a senator, the man she was about to marry in what should have been the happiest day of her life. But fate had other plans, cruel, unpredictable plans. Emily would be left at the altar, humiliated in front of an elite crowd, flashing cameras and national attention. What she never expected, not in her wildest, most romantic dreams, was that her pain would awaken the desire and protection of Alexander Reed, the President of the United States, the most powerful man in the country, ... Moved by a girl who still believed in love. St. Patrick's Cathedral in Manhattan was overflowing. A perfect spring morning had painted the sky in clear blue as sleek black limousines pulled up one after another. Inside, guests gathered: senators, CEOs, celebrities, even a Supreme Court justice. The wedding of Ethan Wallace and Emily Thompson was front-page news. A trending event, the bride, mysterious and reserved, fascinated the public for her serene beauty and traditional values. Emily stood quietly in the back room of the church, adjusting the final touches of her gown. The dress was timeless, French lace, long sheer sleeves, a modest neckline. As she looked into the mirror, she saw not just a bride, but a woman who had waited patiently, who believed in something sacred. She smiled softly. Everything felt right. She believed Ethan loved her, at least. He seemed to. The wedding march began. Emily took a deep breath and stepped into the aisle. Her heart pounded as she clutched a bouquet of white and blush roses. The church fell silent in awe. She was radiant, pale skin glowing under the cathedral lights, gray-blue eyes shimmering with tears, her honey-colored hair in a low chignon with tiny crystal pins. She looked like a painting come to life. Graceful, pure. In the front row, to the left, a man watched silently, wearing a tailored navy suit and silver tie. Alexander Reed, President of the United States, sat motionless. At 42, a widower, known for his steely image and political dominance, Alexander rarely showed emotion, but something about the bride caught him off guard. She wasn't like the women in his world, the ones chasing power or image. She seemed ... real. Emily walked with hope in every step. As she neared the altar, her eyes found Ethan's, but instead of love, she saw something else. Hesitation. No warmth, no smile, just tension. Then in front of everyone, Ethan stepped back. "I'm sorry, Emily. I can't do this," he whispered. The words fell like a grenade. Gasps filled the room. Whispers. Cameras flashing, jaws dropping. Emily froze. The bouquet slipped from her hands. Her heart shattered in silence. She had been abandoned. Publicly, brutally. Alexander didn't move. But something shifted inside him. His gaze never left her. It wasn't pity he felt. It was something deeper, a stirring he hadn't known in years. She didn't deserve this. She needed someone. And without knowing why, he felt it had to be him. And this was only the beginning. The sound of the bouquet hitting the marble floor echoed like a gavel striking down on Emily's heart. For a moment, the entire cathedral stood in stunned silence. Time seemed to freeze. The chandeliers flickered gently above. The musicians stopped playing mid-note, and hundreds of eyes turned toward the altar, unable to believe what had just happened. Emily blinked once, twice. Her chest rose and fell rapidly beneath the lace of her gown. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. Her mind refused to process what her ears had just heard. "I can't do this," Ethan had said. His voice hadn't trembled. It had been clear, cold, final. She looked at him now, really looked. There was no regret on his face, no shame. Just a kind of detached discomfort, like a man stepping out of a contract he never intended to honor. He avoided her eyes, staring at the marble underfoot as if it might swallow him whole. Her heart thudded against her ribs, not just from heartbreak, from humiliation. Her cheeks began to burn, her ears buzzed. She could feel the stares of the crowd, the whispers behind manicured hands, the turned heads, the smartphones, snapping photos despite the sacred setting. Emily felt like she was drowning in air. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice cracking like fragile porcelain. "What are you saying?" But he didn't answer. He simply stepped back again, and this time he turned his back on her, on their vows, on their future. Gasps rippled through the pews. Someone's wine glass tipped and shattered. A woman in the back row stood up as if she couldn't bear to watch. One of the bridesmaids sobbed quietly, and yet, through it all, Emily didn't cry. Not yet. She stood there, a statue in silk and lace, abandoned, exposed, and utterly alone in front of everyone she had ever known, except one man. Alexander Reed hadn't moved from his seat, but his presence shifted like a storm rolling, silently, over calm water. His eyes were fixed on Emily, and for the first time in years, something burned behind them. Anger, compassion, protection. Even he couldn't define it. but it was primal, sharp, personal. He had seen betrayal before, had survived political assassinations, media warfare, national crises, but never, never had he seen anything like this. A young woman, innocent and sincere, discarded like nothing in front of the world, and something inside him growled at the injustice. Across the church, Ethan's father, Senator Wallace, stood up and barked something to his son, but Ethan had already fled down the side aisle, disappearing like a coward. Emily turned slowly, trying to breathe. Her hands were still at her sides, fingers numbed. Then the weight of it all hit her. Her knees wobbled before anyone else could move. Alexander stood, silent, but with the unmistakable energy of power, about to act. His security team tensed instantly, but he raised one hand, a subtle signal that told them not to interfere. He took a step forward. Not as a politician, not as a president, but as a man. A man drawn not to a headline, but to a woman who even, in her ruin, carried herself with grace. Emily's legs buckled slightly. A tear finally escaped her left eye. Just one. But it broke the dam. Her shoulders began to shake, and she stepped backward, away from the altar, from the murmuring guests, from the shame. She wanted to disappear, to vanish, but she didn't realize. Someone had just decided he wouldn't let her. Not now, not ever. And for the first time since that morning, a new feeling entered Emily's chest. Not hope, not yet, but curiosity. A strange invisible force was watching her, holding her, and it was coming closer, coming closer. The stained glass windows of the cathedral filtered sunlight onto the cold marble floor, casting long beams of color over the bride's abandoned bouquet. The once perfect ceremony had collapsed into a muted storm of murmurs, camera flashes, and rising shame. The music had stopped. The whispers were louder now. Some guests pretended to look away, embarrassed for Emily. Others openly stared, hungry for drama. A few were already texting gossip to blogs. Emily stood there, her hands shaking, eyes distant. She felt outside of her body, like the entire world had gone quiet except for the roaring inside her chest. She didn't cry, not because she wasn't breaking, but because she was frozen in place. All she could think was, how do I leave without falling apart in front of them? And then, he moved. Alexander Reed, President of the United States, stepped away from the front pew. Measured. He didn't speak, he didn't need to. His presence alone silenced a full row of murmuring politicians and donors. Security noticed immediately. Agents instinctively straightened, tracking his every step. But Alexander lifted a hand again. Stand down. This wasn't a political move. It wasn't a stunt. It wasn't about votes or image. This was a man. A powerful, emotionally distant man walking toward something he didn't yet understand, but could no longer ignore. Emily didn't notice him at first. Her world was spinning too fast. But as she stepped back from the altar, looking for a way out, her eyes met his. It was like colliding with something unspoken. For a heartbeat, everything else, the whispers, the cameras, the laughter from the back row disappeared. There was just her, and him, a man known for being untouchable, unreachable. And yet, in that instant, his eyes weren't cold. They weren't political. They were human, deep, protective, curious. Emily's breathing hitched. Alexander didn't offer his hand, not yet, but his body moved in subtle defense, placing himself between her and the sea of gazes that had turned her into a public tragedy. He wasn't touching her, but somehow, she already felt shielded. Miss Thompson, he said softly, his voice rich but low. May I walk you out? She blinked. Her lips trembled. She wanted to run, to vanish, but those words grounded her. Not do you need help? Not are you okay? But something respectful, direct, equal. Emily nodded. He didn't take her hand like a savior. Instead, he simply turned with her, and together slowly, gracefully, they walked down the aisle, shoulder to shoulder. The silence in the church was no longer awkward. It was reverent, awed, confused. The most powerful man in the country was walking out, not with a first lady, not with a press secretary, not with a delegation, but with the girl who had just been shattered in front of them all. Outside the cathedral, the chaos began before the doors even opened. Paparazzi crowded the steps. Flashbulbs burst in every direction. Reporters screamed questions, but were held back by Secret Service lines. Did he leave her? Why is the president with the bride? Is this a political message? Alexander ignored them all. Emily's heels clicked softly against the stone steps. Her veil fluttered in the breeze. She wanted to disappear, to melt into nothing. But she didn't, not with him beside her. A black government SUV pulled to the curb. The door opened. Without a word, Alexander motioned her inside. She hesitated only a second, then ducked in. He followed. And as the door shut behind them, sealing them off from the world, Emily looked at him, truly looked. Why did you do that? She whispered, voice still fragile. Alexander didn't smile, but his eyes softened just slightly. Because no one should be left alone like that, he said, especially not you. And just like that, her fate shifted. The door shut with a solid, soundproof thud, silencing the storm of cameras, reporters, and rumors that still raged outside. Inside the armored black SUV, the atmosphere shifted. Quiet, Climate cocooned in a strange stillness neither of them expected. Emily sat stiffly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her veil had slipped slightly off her shoulder, and her lips were pale. She didn't know what to say, or even if she should speak. Nothing about this made sense. One moment she was walking toward a life she thought was hers. The next, she was sitting beside the President of the United States. AlexanderReed.com, as ever, sat beside her, his hands resting lightly on his knees. His posture was relaxed, but there was an undeniable tension just beneath the surface, like something tightly coiled, waiting. He glanced at her only once, then looked forward, as the vehicle pulled away from the cathedral curb. For almost a full minute, neither of them spoke. The city blurred past the tinted windows. Horns in the distance, a helicopter circling above. The chaos outside was relentless. Inside the car, time slowed. Then finally, softly, without turning to face him, Emily broke the silence. "Did they tell you to come get me?" she asked. Her voice was raw, but steady, honest. Alexander turned, his head slowly. "No, they didn't even know I would." Emily let out a shaky breath. "Then why?" A pause. Then, in that deep, deliberate voice of his, he answered, "Because you shouldn't have had to walk out of there alone, and I couldn't sit there and let it happen." She looked at him now, really looked. The lines at the corners of his eyes, the quiet restraint in his expression. He wasn't comforting her in the way people usually tried to. He wasn't offering cliches or sympathy. There was something more, grounded, controlled, and yet fiercely present. She shook her head slowly. "This is crazy. I know. I don't even know you." "You will." That answer startled her. It wasn't flirtation, not exactly. It wasn't a pickup line. It was said with such calm certainty, like it was already decided. Emily turned to the window again, blinking hard as her reflection looked back at her disheveled mascara, smudged, the remnants of a woman who was supposed to be a bride. She felt foolish, embarrassed, small. "Everyone saw it," she whispered. "Yes," Alexander replied. "But what they'll remember is how you stood there." That made her pause. He wasn't just talking about the walk. He meant the moment itself, the pain, the betrayal, the silence, and her strength in the middle of it. It was the first thing anyone had said to her that didn't make her feel like a victim. She looked back at him, her throat tightening. "Why do you care?" Another long pause. His gaze didn't leave hers. "I don't know yet," he said, "but I do." There was no heat in the air, no obvious chemistry, but something was building, slow, magnetic, the kind of electricity that wasn't fire, but gravity, a pull between two people who had no business crossing paths, and yet had collided anyway. The car turned a corner. She noticed they weren't heading to any official building, not the White House satellite office, not a press center. "Where are we going? My private residence?" "In the city," he said plainly. Her eyes widened slightly. "Why?" "To get you out of sight," he said. "You need a place to breathe, and I trust mine more than any hotel in this city." Emily hesitated. Everything inside her told her not to trust people so quickly, but this didn't feel like a man taking advantage. He hadn't touched her, hadn't even leaned too close. There was no pressure, just calm certainty. She nodded slowly. Outside the window, New York kept racing, but inside that car, the world had narrowed to two people who, just hours before, had been strangers. Now, fate was rewriting everything. The SUV turned down a quiet street just off Park Avenue, a secluded stretch of Manhattan shielded from paparazzi and noise by high trees, private security, and black iron gates. It didn't scream power, it whispered it as they pulled through the automated gate. Emily realized this wasn't just a residence. It was a fortress wrapped in elegance. The building was a classic pre-war townhouse, tall windows, ivy climbing the stone, and soft lanterns glowing on either side of the heavy oak door. Alexander stepped out first. His security team moved with silent precision, communicating with subtle nods. One agent opened Emily's door with care, avoiding eye contact. No press, no chaos. Just cold air and polished stone. Emily hesitated, then stepped out, holding her gown with one hand to keep it from dragging too much. She felt surreal, like she was floating, not really walking. The chill of the spring breeze hit her bare shoulders, and goosebumps rose along her arms. Alexander noticed immediately. Without a word, he removed his jacket and gently draped it over her shoulders. The gesture wasn't dramatic, it was quiet, intentional. She whispered, "Thank you," and followed him up the steps. Inside, the townhouse was warm, modern, and understated. Dark wood floors, clean lines, floor-to-ceiling windows with linen curtains drawn shut, no marble columns, no presidential portraits. Just space. Safe. Still space. "You're safe here," he said, locking the door behind them. "No one gets in without me knowing." Emily nodded. "I still feel like I'm inside a dream. A weird one." Alexander almost smiled, almost. He motioned toward the hallway. "There's a guest room at the end. Full bathroom, clean clothes, whatever you need. No staff tonight. Just me, and you." She paused at that, not because it sounded threatening, it didn't, but because it was honest and a little too quiet. "I don't want to be a burden," she said. turning toward him. You're not, I don't even know what to say to you. You don't have to say anything. For a long moment, it just stood there in the hallway. Her in a wedding dress that now felt like a costume. And him, sleeves rolled to his forearms, eyes steady. Voice calm. Emily finally turned and walked down the hall. She pushed open the guest room door and closed it behind her. Alone, she leaned against it, exhaling deeply, finally feeling the heat of shame, exhaustion, and sadness all at once. She kicked off her shoes, pulled the veil from her hair, and slowly, delicately, unzipped the dress that had once symbolized everything she believed in. It fell silently to the floor. She wrapped herself in a towel and walked to the bathroom, splashing her face with cold water. When she returned, she found a folded set of soft clothes, cotton joggers, a t-shirt left on the bed, untouched, and next to it, a handwritten note. No one sees you here, unless you want them to. She stared at the note for a long time, unsure of why it moved her. Downstairs, Alexander poured himself a glass of whiskey and stood near the window. His phone buzzed. Press inquiries, party fallout, speculation. He ignored them all. His mind was not on policy, scandal, or political damage control. It was on her, the way she held herself, the quiet strength. The moment she looked into his eyes and didn't ask for rescue, just dignity, he didn't understand what was happening between them. It wasn't romantic, not yet, but it was real, and it wasn't going away. Upstairs, Emily lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the borrowed t-shirt warm against her skin. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She only knew one thing for certain. He saw her not as a story, not as a scandal, but as a woman. Sunlight crept softly through the linen curtains, painting golden lines across the guest bedroom's polished wood floor. For a moment, Emily wasn't sure where she was. The bed beneath her was too soft, the silence too complete. No wedding bells, no guests, no Ethan. Then it hit her. She sat up slowly. Her body ached, not from any injury, but from the weight of what had happened. Her chest still carried that dull, pulsing ache of public humiliation, of betrayal, of grief. She was supposed to wake up this morning in a suite at the plaza, next to a husband. Instead, she was waking up in the private townhouse of the President of the United States, still wearing the soft cotton t-shirt he'd left for her. Emily swung her legs over the edge of the bed and ran her fingers through her hair. She didn't cry. There were no tears left for Ethan, only confusion, only questions, and beneath all of that, something else, a strange sense of safety, of stillness. She stood and walked barefoot toward the guest bathroom, freshened up as best she could, and found a hair tie in the vanity drawer. When she emerged a few minutes later, someone had left a second note on the hallway table. There's coffee in the kitchen, and quiet, Her lips twitched into something close to a smile. Downstairs, the smell of toast, eggs, and roasted coffee wafted through the air. Alexander Reed stood in the open kitchen, sleeves rolled again, new tie, new aides, new press, just a man, making breakfast. Emily paused in the doorway. He glanced at her once, then gestured toward the French press. I wasn't sure how you take it, so I made it strong. She stepped in slowly. Black is fine. He poured her a cup. She took it, nodding in thanks, and stood across the island from him. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then, it's everywhere, isn't it? She asked. He nodded. Every channel, every feed, every headline? Emily inhaled sharply. What are they saying? He studied her carefully. They're asking questions. Why he left? Who you are? Why I walked you out? Her fingers gripped the edge of the counter. Are they blaming you? He shrugged slightly. Not yet. Mostly, they're fascinated. She looked up, meeting his eyes. Do you regret it? Alexander didn't blink. No, she exhaled, the answer hitting her deeper than she expected. I should leave, she said. Get out of the way before it becomes worse for you. He leaned forward slightly. You didn't ask for any of this. And I don't run from stories. I write them. His tone was calm, but something simmered just beneath it. A protectiveness. A challenge. And Emily sat on one of the tall stools at the island, her hands wrapped around the warm mug. She took a slow sip, watching him over the rim. She still didn't understand why he cared, why he'd gone out of his way, why he hadn't just let her disappear into the back of that cathedral like a forgotten headline. You're not like I expected, she said quietly. I get that a lot. I thought you'd be colder. He raised an eyebrow. I can be, but not with me. That line landed between them with quiet weight. Alexander turned and took 2 plates from the counter, eggs, toast, a few fresh strawberries, and placed one in front of her. Eat. You'll feel human again. She obeyed, because the truth was, she was starving, not just for food, but for something stable, something real. They ate in silence for a few minutes. No small talk, no questions, just quiet company. Then she asked, the one thing that had been building all morning, what happens now? Alexander looked at her, not as a president, but as a man who'd seen something worth protecting. That depends, he said, on whether you want to be invisible or unforgettable. Emily didn't respond, but something in her eyes shifted, and just like that, the girl who was left at the altar began to rise from the ashes. The rest of breakfast passed in a slow, grounding rhythm. The kind of quiet where no one had to fill the silence, because the silence itself wasn't empty. It was real. Human. Emily had nearly finished her plate when she set her fork down, and looked up, so she said, gently clearing her throat. What happens when I step outside that door? Alexander didn't answer immediately. He reached for the remote on the kitchen island, pointed it toward the wall-mounted screen, and turned on the morning news. Her photo flashed instantly, a still shot of her in the wedding dress. Standing alone at the altar, Ethan stepping away in the background. Below it, a banner headline, "The Abandoned Bride, Shocking Scene at High-Profile Political Wedding." Emily's heart twisted, but her face remained still. He flipped through other channels. Every major network, every blog, every feed. One anchor speculated on hidden family drama. Another implied that she may have done something to scare Ethan off. A third hinted at a quiet connection between the bride and the president himself. "I see," Emily whispered. "So I'm a meme now." Alexander muted the screen. "You're not a meme," he said. "You're a moment, one that's already spinning out of control." She turned to him slowly. "So what do I do?" He looked at her for a long, steady beat. Then he stepped around the island and sat beside her, not across from her. "I can make this disappear," he said. "My team, my lawyers. I can bury it under the next news cycle. You'll get an apology from his father, a quiet settlement, maybe even an interview offer if you want to clear your name. Then you can go back to wherever you want to go." Quietly, she nodded slowly. "And the other option?" His voice dropped just slightly, or he leaned forward. World, see what kind of woman he walked away from. Emily blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean you don't run," Alexander said. "You don't hide. You rise. With me, it wasn't romantic. It wasn't soft. It was bold, dangerous. Maybe even a little crazy," he continued. "You stay here, for a while, with my protection, under my terms. You get your dignity back, not from hiding, but by stepping into the storm and owning it." She stared at him, barely breathing. "Why would you offer that to me?" she asked. "Because I don't believe in letting good people be destroyed for sport," he replied. "Because I don't believe a woman should be punished for believing in love." "And what do you get out of it?" she asked, not as an accusation, but as a real, measured question. Alexander's eyes met hers. "I don't know yet," he said honestly, "but I want to find out." She looked away, staring at the blank TV screen. The reflection of her face, tired, vulnerable, but alive, stared back. "Staying here, with you," she said carefully. "People will talk. They already are. There will be rumors. There always are." Her heart pounded. "This isn't a proposal, Emily," he said. "It's an offer. You don't owe me anything, but you have a choice. Let them define you, or let me protect you while you define yourself." Emily looked back at him, and in that moment, something inside her flickered. It wasn't trust, not fully, but it was curiosity, and the faintest whisper of power. Her power. "Okay," she said softly. "Then I'm staying." A slow pause. Alexander nodded once. "Good," he said. "Then we start rewriting your story, right now." And as they sat together in the quiet kitchen, everything shifted. Not love. Not yet, but something even riskier. A connection neither of them saw coming, and neither of them would be able to stop. The day passed in slow, strange waves, while the world outside buzzed with speculation, clipped headlines, and breaking news banners. Inside Alexander Reed's private townhouse, time softened. The tension that had gripped Emily's body all morning began to loosen, not fully, but just enough to let her breathe. She spent most of the afternoon in the guest room, lying on the wide bed, watching the shadows move across the walls. Once, she checked her phone. Over 300 missed messages, dozens from unknown numbers. She turned it off and tucked it into a drawer. Downstairs, Alexander made a few phone calls. Quiet, decisive conversations. She couldn't hear the words, but she could feel the calm command in his voice. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't worried about how this might look. He was simply present. At 6 p.m., he knocked softly on her door. "Dinner's ready," he said, his voice low. She opened the door slowly. Her hair was pulled back again, face fresh, dressed now in a soft black sweater and the same joggers from earlier. She looked nothing like the bride she was hours ago, but she also didn't look broken. Downstairs, the dining room was set for two. Nothing formal, no staff, no crystal, just warm lighting, real food, and a bottle of red wine breathing on the counter. They ate quietly at first. Pasta, roasted vegetables, bread still warm from the oven. She found herself surprised by how simple it all felt. Comfortable. About halfway through the meal, she asked, "Do you ever get tired of always being the one in control?" He looked up from his plate. "I don't always feel in control." She tilted her head. "You could have fooled me." He gave the smallest of smiles. "Being calm doesn't mean I'm not affected." She let that linger. Later, after dinner, they moved to the living room. A fire crackled gently in the fireplace. Rain began tapping against the windows, soft, steady, like the city exhaling. Emily curled her legs beneath her on the couch, a throw blanket draped across her lap. Alexander sat in the armchair beside her, a tumbler of whiskey in his hand, eyes half lost in the flames. It would have been easy to fill the moment with forced conversation, but neither of them did. Instead, they let the silence speak for them. Not uncomfortable, but open. Honest. Eventually, she turned to him. You don't treat me like someone who needs saving. He looked over at her. You don't act like someone who does. But You were wronged, he said, choosing his words carefully. But you're not broken. Emily didn't reply. But something in her chest settled. Not because he made her feel stronger, but because he saw the strength that had been buried under the shame. The fire burned lower. The clock moved past midnight. Jochy stood slowly. I should get some sleep. He rose too, setting his glass on the side table. They faced each other, not close enough to touch, but close enough to feel the pull. That delicate, invisible thread that had been tightening between them all day. He didn't reach for her. He didn't lean in. He simply looked at her, steady and quiet. Good night, Emily, he said. She hesitated. Good night, Mr. President, she replied. A soft smile in her voice, he exhaled, almost amused. You can just call me Alexander. She nodded once, and then she turned and walked back down the hallway, barefoot, quiet. When she reached the guest room door, she paused, not from fear, but from something else. A strange weight, a sense that something was beginning. She stepped inside. He remained in the living room a few minutes longer, staring into the fire. 2 rooms, 1 house, and a door that stayed closed. For now, the rain came harder after midnight. It swept across the city in sheets, rattling window panes, washing neon reflections down quiet sidewalks, and muffling the usual rhythm of Manhattan. But inside the townhouse, everything remained still warm. Light from the fire, the faint ticking of a grandfather clock down the hall, and silence. Emily lay awake in the guest bed, staring at the ceiling. Her body was still, but her mind raced. She hadn't cried, not once. It wasn't because she didn't want to. The tears were there, hovering just behind her eyes. But something kept holding them back. Not pride, not denial, something deeper. She was afraid that once they started, she wouldn't be able to stop. Across the hall, Alexander sat at his desk, still fully dressed. A half-finished report glowed on his tablet screen, but he hadn't read a word of it. His attention kept drifting, to the hallway, to the fire, to the memory of her voice when she said his name for the first time. Good night, Mr. President. No one in his world called him that with a smile anymore. Not in years. He stood and crossed the room, staring out the rain-slicked window. The streetlights blurred through the glass. Somewhere across the city, reporters were still tearing through her story, digging into her background, analyzing photos, framing their angles. He should be worried. He single quotes T. He should be focused. He couldn't be what he was conflicted. He didn't bring women into his space. He didn't entangle his life with emotion. Not since Claire, his late wife, not since the days when love was something he believed he could trust. But tonight, with Emily just a few feet away, he felt something unfamiliar. Not lust, not even desire, at least not yet, but pull, a draw to something soft in a world that had gone hard. Emily turned onto her side, pulling the blanket tighter. The sound of the rain made it harder to think, not easier. She kept seeing Ethan's face, not his betrayal but the weeks before. The way he spoke to her like a politician, even when they were alone. The way she'd ignored the small hesitations in her gut. She had loved him, or maybe, she had loved the version of herself she wanted to become through him, but not once, not even once did she feel truly safe in his presence. And now, in this strange house, after the worst day of her life, she felt something close to safety. It terrified her downstairs. Alexander moved back to the kitchen. He poured a glass of water, but didn't drink it. His mind was on her, on the girl who was supposed to become someone's wife, but instead became the nation's question mark. What was he doing? Why did he feel so responsible? He didn't have the answers, and that was rare for him. Back upstairs, Emily sat up, unable to fight the restlessness. She pulled the sweater tighter around her, walked barefoot to the window, and looked out over the city. The rain painted the glass in streaks, and the distant lights of New York twinkled like stars. Somewhere out there, her old life was ending, and here something else was beginning. And though she didn't know what to call it, she knew this much. She wasn't invisible anymore, and for the first time in a long time, someone was watching over her, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. The clock on the nightstand read 2:17. M. The rain hadn't stopped. Emily stood by the window in the guest room, arms folded across her chest, her bare feet cool against the hardwood floor. She hadn't moved for nearly 10 minutes, just watched the storm blur the lights of the city beyond the glass. She should have been asleep. She knew that, but something in her chest wouldn't settle, a slow, pulsing ache of confusion, disbelief, and anticipation. She turned from the window, walked to the bathroom, and splashed cold water on her face. Her reflection in the mirror was softer. Now the mascara had been washed away. The veil was gone. The bride was gone. All that remained was the woman underneath, real, raw, uncertain. When she stepped back into the room, she froze. There was a sound, a knock. Soft, measured, 2 taps. Her heart skipped, not out of fear, out of instinct. She knew who it was. She moved quietly across the floor, and opened the door just enough to see him. Alexander. He stood there in a black long-sleeve shirt, sleeves pushed to his elbows, no tie, no jacket. The shadows from the hallway wrapped around him, casting him in dim gold and darkness, but his eyes, those eyes were awake, and watching her like she was the only thing in the world still worth looking at. For a second, they didn't say anything, just stood in silence to people, caught in the middle of a storm neither of them had expected. I couldn't sleep, he said finally, voice low and warm. Me neither. He shifted slightly, as if unsure whether to step forward or retreat. I wanted to make sure you were okay. I'm not, she said honestly, but I'm still standing. That made something flicker in him, not admiration exactly, something deeper, recognition. Another long silence passed. Then she asked, so softly she barely heard it herself, why does this feel like something? Alexander held her gaze. Because it is. That stopped her breath. They weren't close, enough to touch, just inches from it. Her fingers curled lightly around the edge of the door. His hands were in his pockets, like he was grounding himself from saying too much, and in that space between them was everything unspoken. She wanted to reach out. She didn't. He wanted to move closer. He didn't. Because this moment wasn't for crossing lines. It was for seeing each other fully, completely, in the silence between brokenness and whatever came next. Emily nodded once. Barely. Alexander stepped back slightly, the tension still in his jaw. If you need anything, he began. I know, she said. Then. Before either of them could make a mistake they weren't ready to face, she slowly closed the door. But she didn't turn away. She stood there, just behind it, her palm resting against the wood, and on the other side, Alexander stood in the same stillness, staring at the closed door with something he hadn't felt in years. Longing, not for touch, not for power, but for closeness that didn't demand anything. A storm still raged outside, but inside, that house between those two hearts, something even more dangerous had begun. Hope. Hope. By 6 a.m., the rain had finally stopped. The city outside had already begun to stir, taxis splashing through puddles, vendors unlocking carts, and the low hum of a Monday morning building beneath Manhattan's skin. But inside the townhouse, the air was still thick with silence. Emily lay in bed with her eyes open. She hadn't slept, not really, just drifted in and out of half-dreams, always coming back to the same image. Alexander, standing in her doorway, saying because it is. She kept replaying those three words. Soft, steady, certain, because it is. He hadn't touched her, hadn't even stepped inside the room, and yet, she'd never felt so seen, so aware of her own heartbeat. She got up slowly, pulled on the sweater again, and padded barefoot down the hallway. The scent of fresh coffee was already rising from the kitchen, warm and sharp, like a quiet promise that today would begin differently than the one before. Alexander was already there. He stood at the kitchen island, dressed in tailored charcoal, slacks and a dark navy button-up, sleeves still rolled, collar undone, presidential, but human. He looked like someone who hadn't slept either, but who had already accepted it. He glanced up when she entered. Their eyes met, and for just a second, everything stilled. No greeting, no awkward small talk, just that same magnetic quiet. He nodded, toward the French press. It's fresh. She poured herself a mug and took the seat across from him. For a few minutes, neither of them said much. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was almost comfortable, familiar, somehow. Then he slid his phone across the island toward her. A news site was open, one of the major ones. Her name was the headline. Again, from abandoned bride to first gentleman's mystery guest, who was Emily Thompson. Beneath it, photos of her at the wedding, then blurred long lens shots from yesterday, entering the SUV, entering his townhouse. No context, no facts, just suggestions. Gossip pretending to be journalism? Emily stared at it, her jaw tightening. They make it sound like I planned all of this. They need a story, Alexander said calmly, and when they don't have one, they invent one. Are they saying we're involved? He looked at her carefully. They're wondering, they're hoping. Hoping, she asked, surprised. They'd love a scandal, especially one with me in it. And what if we give them something else? She asked, half serious, half defiant. Something they don't know how to spin. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. Like what? He asked. She shrugged, her mug warm between her hands. Like dignity, grace, silence when they expect drama. You're thinking like a strategist, he said, the corner of his mouth lifting just slightly. No, I'm just thinking like a woman, who's done letting people write her story for her. That landed deep. For a man who had built a career on control, on being the author of every headline, he suddenly found himself wanting to follow hers. He stood, walked to the sink, and said, without turning around, "There's a gala tomorrow night, private, restricted press, diplomatic donors only." I was going alone. She raised an eyebrow. "You're inviting me?" "I'm asking you," he said, "as my guest, not my distraction." Emily set her coffee down. "Won't that feed the rumors?" "Yes," he replied, "but maybe this time, you're not the scandal? Maybe you're the headline worth reading." The room went still. She didn't answer right away, not because she was unsure, but because for the first time, She understood what he was offering wasn't protection anymore. It was partnership, a dangerous one, a bold one, a real one. And in her chest, something whispered, "Say yes." Emily stood in front of the full-length mirror in the guest room, hands resting lightly on her waist. The dress in front of her was nothing like the gown from the wedding. No lace, no train, no soft ivory glow that made her feel like a porcelain version of herself. This one was sleek, black, sculpted. It followed the line of her body like it had been made for her, and ended in a quiet slit just above the knee. It was bold, elegant, unapologetic. Alexander_'s team had sent options discreetly, without fuss, each one more stunning than the last, but this dress had stopped her. It didn't ask for attention, it demanded respect. She turned slowly in the mirror. Her hair was up clean, simple, and her makeup understated. She didn't want to look like a different person. She wanted to look like herself, just finally seen. For a moment, she hesitated. She could still hear the whispers, the tabloid headlines, the speculation. Who is she? Why is she with him? What does she want? She touched the fabric over her ribs, breathing in deeply. This wasn't about them, not anymore. This was about standing in a room full of people who thought they knew her story, and rewriting it without saying a single word. Downstairs, Alexander waited near the front entrance, adjusting the cuff of his shirt. He wore a deep black suit, crisp and tailored, no tie. Presidential, yes, but deliberately restrained. His team had begged him to take a security motorcade. He said no. Tonight wasn't about a show of power, it was about presence and presence. He knew, wasn't just about him anymore. He turned when he heard her footsteps on the stairs. His gaze lifted and stopped. There she was, not the broken bride, not the abandoned headline. Emily, he said nothing at first. Just looked at her, her posture, her stillness. The way she didn't fidget, or glance down or ask how she looked, because she knew. "You're sure about this?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "Once, if I don't face them now, I never will." He offered his arm, not as an escort, not as a claim, but as an equal. A signal. She took it. They stepped into the cool evening air together, cameras flashing from far-off rooftops. The waiting car pulled up. The driver didn't speak. Alexander opened the door for her, not out of formality, but out of choice. Then he followed her in. Inside the quiet, dimmed car, Emily stared out the tinted window as they pulled away from the townhouse. Her pulse raced, but her spine stayed straight. She didn't feel like a prop or a statement. She felt like a woman finally steering her own story, even if she had no idea where it would end. Beside her, Alexander didn't touch her. He didn't need to. His presence alone felt like armor, and hers. He wouldn't admit it yet, but it steadied him in a way that nothing else had in years. They rode in silence. Not because there was nothing to say, but because what they were building didn't need words yet, only truth. Only truth. The black car rolled to a stop beneath the marble archway of the Van Allen Diplomatic Hall, a private venue nestled between embassies and historic brownstones in the Upper East Side, the kind of place reserved for quiet power, senators, CEOs, diplomats, royals. Tonight, however, all eyes turned not toward policy or power plays, but toward the woman stepping out of the president's car. Emily. The second her heel touched the stone, cameras surged. Silent, of course, per the gayless rules, but no less intense. Phones weren't allowed inside, but the red carpet outside had no mercy. She paused, just briefly, beneath the glow of antique lanterns. Her black dress shimmered under the soft lights. Her jaw was steady, her hands relaxed. She wasn't posing, she was arriving. Alexander stepped beside her a second later, hand resting lightly at the small of her back, not possessive, but anchoring, protective. A signal to everyone watching that this wasn't some passing distraction, this was intentional. Inside, the ballroom was awash in gold and navy. Crystal chandeliers glowed above soft jazz, and murmured conversations drifted between velvet booths and polished marble bars. Waiters in black gloves carried champagne. Politicians traded smiles like currency. And then they noticed her, a ripple of movement, heads turning, eyebrows raising. Whispers, "Is that her? She came with him. She looks nothing like I expected. She looks better." Emily heard every word, not clearly, but enough. And still, she didn't flinch. Alexander leaned in, his voice low. "We can leave whenever you want." She met his eyes. "I'm not running." He nodded once, respected it, respected her. They moved together through the crowd, and for the first time, people stepped back, not just for him, but for her. She wasn't just on his arm. She was a force beside him, poised, quiet, impossible to ignore. Senator Aldridge approached, all smooth charm and political teeth. "Mr. President," he greeted, then turned to Emily, trying to calculate her quickly. "And, Miss Thompson, is it?" Emily smiled, polite but unreadable. "That's right. I must say, you've handled the attention with grace." "Is it what we're calling it now?" she said, voice light but sharp. Alexander nearly smiled a few feet away. First Lady Cecilia Grayson, polished, powerful, gave Emily a slow nod of respect. No words, just acknowledgement. That was louder than applause. The hours passed slowly. they spoke with ambassadors. Journalists tried to sneak glances, people watched Alexander closely, but they watched Emily closer. They wanted her to flinch, to fumble, to prove she didn't belong. She didn't give them the satisfaction. But beneath all of that poise, beneath the silk and the lighting, and the small talk, something else had begun to simmer. Between her and Alexander, it wasn't obvious. There were no lingering touches, no whispered exchanges, but it was there in the spaces between them, the way his body subtly mirrored hers, the way her gaze found his across the crowd, the way both of them seemed aware of the other's presence, like a current beneath their feet. By the time the event ended, Emily's throat was dry. Her nerves were finally catching up, but something else had changed. They stepped back into the car. This time, she was the one who leaned closer first. "Why did you really bring me tonight?" she asked, eyes locked on his. Alexander didn't look away. "Because I needed them to see you the way I do," he said. A silence fell, not empty. Charged. And for the first time since this all began, Emily didn't just feel watched. She felt wanted. The car door shut behind them with a soft click. Back at the townhouse, the world outside faded again. The press, the politics, the rumors, all left behind the moment they stepped inside. But something else had followed them in. Peat, not the kind that crackled in the fireplace, or rose from the city's wet pavement. This was quieter, deeper, the kind that lived in glances too long and silences too full. The kind that had been building for days. Slow, steady, undeniable. Emily walked a few steps ahead of him, pulling off her heels as she crossed the living room. The black dress still clung to her in all the right places, but her shoulders finally relaxed. She looked over at him, barefoot now, her hair beginning to fall loose from the perfect bun, and he looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time, all over again. She turned. "Do you want a drink?" He nodded. "Whiskey, if you're having one." "I am." She poured two. Neat. No words, just the quiet of midnight settling over two people too aware of each other. When she handed him his glass, their fingers brushed just for a second, but it was enough to steal her breath. They didn't move away. Instead, they stood there, inches apart, and for the first time, didn't pretend not to feel it. The silence between them thickened. Her voice came low. "They looked at me like I didn't belong. They were wrong," he said. No hesitation. She looked up at him, her lashes lowered slightly. "You've been watching me since that moment in the church." "I have." "Why?" Alexander's eyes locked on hers, dark, intense, searching. "Because I couldn't not." The glass in her hand felt suddenly heavy. The air between them tightened, every inch charged. He took a step closer, not possessive, not fast, just close, enough that she could feel the warmth radiating off of him, the gravity in his stillness. "You don't have to be careful with me," she whispered, her voice trembling. He shook his head slightly. "I do, because this isn't about rescuing you anymore." "Then what is it about?" He didn't answer. Instead, his hand brushed her cheek, slow, deliberate, as if asking permission before even touching her. She leaned into it without thinking. His thumb paused just below her jaw, his breath now close enough to taste, and then he stopped, right there, inches from her lips, waiting. Her voice broke the silence, barely above a breath. "Are you going to kiss me?" "Not unless you want me to." She stared at him, the man the world feared, the man who had protected her, seen her, stood by her when no one else did. And in this moment, he wasn't a president, he was just him, and she was no longer a girl abandoned at the altar. She was a woman standing at the edge of something real. She set her glass down on the table behind her. Then she whispered, "Yes." And with that, the space between them finally disappeared. Her yes hung in the air between them, soft, but certain. For a man like Alexander Reed, who had built an empire on control, precision, and silence, consent wasn't just a word, it was everything. And now, standing in front of a woman who had every reason to close herself off to the world, he saw the opposite. She was opening herself to him. Not because she needed saving, because she chose to. His hand slid gently behind her neck, fingers threading through the soft waves of her hair. Her body melted into his instinctively, not in desperation, but in something deeper. Something that said, "I'm not afraid anymore." He leaned in slowly. No rush, no heat, for, the sake, of, heat. Just the kind of kiss that starts in the chest before it ever touches the lips. The kind that lingers one breath away for a moment longer than expected. The kind you only give to someone you can't pretend not to feel. And then their mouths met, soft at first, exploring, unsure. The gentle press of lips that carried days of restraint, layers of emotion, and a current neither of them had been willing to name until now. Emily's hand moved to his chest, not to push him away, but to ground herself. She felt it, the strength in him, the stillness, and the way he let himself be undone by something as simple as her touch. Alexander deepened the kiss, just slightly, his other arm wrapped around her waist, drawing her in, but not claiming her. He kissed like a man who'd forgotten what it was like to be kissed for real, not for power, not for performance, but for truth. And Emily, she kissed like someone reclaiming something, not just affection. Herself, For the first time since she was left at that altar, she felt chosen, not because she was convenient, not because she was obedient or beautiful or easy to display, but because she was her. When they finally parted, their foreheads touched. Neither of them spoke. Their breaths mingled. His voice came first, low and hoarse. "That's not what I expected." She smiled, chest still rising and falling. "Me either. You, okay?" She nodded. "More than okay." He stepped back just enough to look at her, not with desire, not with hunger, but with something infinitely rarer, respect. "I'm not rushing you into anything," he said softly. "You don't owe me more than that." She shook her head. "I know. That's what makes it different." They stood in the soft light of the townhouse living room, the rain now gone, the city quiet, and the fire dying low. No cameras, no scripts, no titles, just a man who was used to commanding the world, and a woman who had finally decided to command herself. In that silence, something shifted again, not faster, but deeper, a knowing, whatever this was. It had just begun, and neither of them would walk away the same.